I knew that there are quite a few men who prefer older women, and I never judged anyone for it. At least until I found my wife at home with a young guy who was almost half my wife's age. Then I realized that my marriage was over, and my wife had turned the whole family against me. I got my revenge. A heavy rain cut short Ray's golf game shortly after it began. He and the rest of his group lingered at the clubhouse hoping the rain would ease up, but it became clear that it wouldn't. Ray felt disappointed because he loved playing golf, and it was his main form of exercise for the week. His reduced activity wasn't solely due to his heart condition. At 64 years old, he knew his physical exertions were naturally limited. Despite this, he remained in good shape, mindful of his diet, and managed most of the yard work at his modest home, which he shared with his wife of 40 years, Josie. And so Ray found himself entering his house just after 9 a.m., much earlier than he usually returns at 12:30 p.m. He did not inform his wife about his early arrival, and had never felt the need for similar situations in the past. He planned to explain himself upon arrival. However, all thoughts of an explanation disappeared as soon as he opened the front door. His wife stood in the doorway, dressed in a pink silk robe, loosely tied in front. Normally, this would not have caused concern, but his attention was attracted by a young man younger than their own daughter, whom his wife accompanied to the front door in such a state. At 59, Josie remained quite attractive. Shoulder-length dark brown hair gracefully framed her face. Despite the fact that her figure had changed over the years, especially after the birth of children, she still had some weight in the hips and abdomen, as befits a woman of her age. However, this didn't seem to bother Ray or, presumably, the man who was currently in her company. Ray noticed Josie's disheveled hair and quickly assessed her body condition, noticing signs indicating recent activity. Despite all the doubts, he figured it all out in a matter of seconds. When Josie saw that he had returned home instead of feeling guilty or embarrassed, which he expected, she greeted him with her usual smile, clearly glad to see him. To his surprise, she even reached out to kiss him. "Hi, honey, you're back early." Ray dodged her attempt to kiss him, prompting an embarrassed look from his wife. "Are you crazy, Josie?" Ray exclaimed. Josie looked back at the young man, momentarily forgetting his presence before realizing her mistake. "Oh, Ray, I'm so sorry. Honey, this is Luke. Luke, meet my husband, Ray." Luke was a little under 6 feet tall than Ray, but he had the sturdy build typical of people in their early 30s, who probably played sports in college and probably still do. His dark brown hair was cut short, and his face was plain, neither handsome nor ugly. As he stepped forward, his hand rested on Ray's shoulder. Ray felt the urge to react physically, but managed to restrain himself. "Hi, nice to meet you. Josie mentioned you a lot. And don't worry. I'm sure that in 25 or 30 years I'll have to deal with the same hardware problems, and I hope to handle them as gracefully as you do now." Most of all, of course, he missed being close to Josie. Age had robbed him of the ability to maintain intimacy, and various medications were contraindicated. Despite this, he and Josie tried to maintain their personal lives as best they could. There were many ways to do this. Ray always made sure that Josie was satisfied, although he himself could not experience the same. Previously, it was enough for him to get satisfaction from her pleasure. Apparently, this is no longer the case. Ray returned Luke's casual smile with a fierce glare. Who does this guy think he is, talking to him like that? But Ray didn't want to risk jail, so he pulled himself together again. "Luke, get out of my house. And if I see you here again, one of us will leave here in a garbage bag. And I have a gun." Luke's smile disappeared instantly, and he backed away, heading for the front door. "Hey, dude, that's cool. I thought you didn't mind." Ray locked the door after it closed, exchanged a fleeting glance with his wife, and headed to his bedroom. He was furious and confused by his wife's apparent lack of regret or concern about what had just happened. Soon after, she followed him into the room, now in a bathrobe. "Well, that was rude." Ray turned around abruptly, unable to believe that she was criticizing him after her actions. He hadn't planned to confront her right now, but this was too much. Was that rude? I come home and I see you walking some guy to the door, who obviously just slept with, and I'm such a rude guy. You're completely crazy. Josie's expression softened. She came up to him and tried to touch his shoulder, but he recoiled as soon as her hand touched him. Darling, I'm sorry, but it's been so long. What we were doing was great, and I loved it, but it just wasn't enough for me. That would have been helpful information for me to know. Where on earth did you find this guy? He's a friend of Marjorie's. A friend? He's barely half her age. Well, she was single when she met Oscar. She gave him up, but she and I had discussed him before, and she gave me his details. Do you realize that he's just using both of you for easy intimacy? Actually, he explained that he was attracted to older women, Josie replied. When he was 18, his mom asked him to help the housemates. Some couldn't pay much, so they offered intimacy. He says he ended up preferring older women, and even if he uses me, I do the same, so what's the harm? How long has this been going on? Ray asked. A few months. He comes over when you're out playing golf. He's always gone long before you're back, and I have everything cleaned up. It doesn't affect you at all. You get your exercise, and I get mine, so to speak. Ray suddenly understood why Saturdays had become Change the Sheets Day. Well, I don't care if you think it doesn't affect me just because I'm not here. I won't accept it, and I'll give up golf if I have to. Raymond, please, let's be reasonable about this. You need your golf game, it's your only exercise. And I have needs that can be taken care of during that time. It makes perfect sense. Maybe to you, Josephine, but not to me. This was the last time. After that, Ray went into his bedroom to shower and change into more casual clothes. Josie went to her closet to get dressed, then left the house and drove a few miles to where Christine lived with her husband and their 2 daughters, Josie's granddaughters. By the time Ray had showered and dressed, the house was empty. Finding no note, he assumed his wife wanted to be away from him. That suited him fine, as he felt the same. The shower had helped calm him down, and he tried to approach the situation logically. He understood that Josie had her own needs, but what she did felt like too much. He believed he wouldn't have acted similarly if their roles were reversed, and he didn't think he was being unreasonable. Josie would simply have to accept his stance. The following day, Sunday, happened to be the 4th of July. All the extended family from the area planned to gather for a midday cookout, followed by an evening outing to the large community park for a fireworks show. This tradition had endured since Christine was a child, and Ray eagerly anticipated it every year. Ray spent the morning preparing the food. He marinated chicken and burgers and set out hot dogs for the younger children who would be joining them. By the time guests began arriving, everything was ready, and Ray was looking forward to enjoying time with his loved ones. The barbecue proceeded smoothly. Many friends were also present, and Josie appeared joyful as she smiled and laughed. Although Ray had been deeply hurt upon discovering her with another man, she had been a wonderful wife for 4 decades, and it was something he was willing to forgive. This time. As guests began to leave the house, Ray excused himself to rest. His heart condition limited his stamina, and he wanted to be fresh for tonight's fireworks. He kissed his wife on the cheek, informed her he was going to lie down for a while, and headed to the bedroom. When his alarm went off a couple of hours later, he felt rejuvenated. The nap had revived him, and now he could fully enjoy the fireworks without any concerns. After changing into fresh clothes, he entered the living room. Seated around the dining room table were his closest family members, his wife at one end, his granddaughters Julia, 19 years old, and Allison, 17 years old, on the opposite side. Christine's husband Eric nearby, and Christine herself standing closest to Ray. On the other side of the table sat his son Leo and Leo's wife Rebecca, directly across from Julia and Allison. All eyes turned towards him as he entered. Ray recognized an intervention when it unfolded before him. What's going on? His daughter Christine seemed to be leading the discussion. We wanted to discuss Mom with you, she said. Ray glanced at his wife, hoping for some clue, But her expression remained impassive. He prayed silently that this conversation wasn't heading where he feared. Turning back to his daughter, he asked cautiously, "What about your mom?" "Mom told us about Luke," Christine replied. "She did, huh?" Ray responded, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Yes. And also about your issues." Ray stared at his wife in shock, astonished that she had disclosed such personal matters to their children and grandchildren. "My issues, and, frankly, this whole situation are none of your concern. But Mom's happiness is important to us," Christine insisted. "So you're not happy?" Ray questioned his wife directly. "I am happy, Ray. Please understand that," Josie replied. "But she has needs, Dad," Christine interjected. "And, well, it's not something you're able to fulfill. That's the truth, isn't it? So you think I'm being unreasonable, like selfish for not agreeing to this?" "We're not labeling it, Dad. Look, all we're saying is that since you can't do it, we believe you should support Mom discreetly taking care of it herself." Ray surveyed his family's expressions. Each one appeared to endorse his wife's desire to have an affair, or at least didn't oppose it outright. Though he hadn't physically aged in those fleeting moments, Ray felt a profound mental and emotional weariness, as if 2 decades had passed in an instant. Never before had he felt so futile and aged. "And," he struggled to say, "you all agree with this?" He looked directly at each of them, receiving nods of confirmation. Yet Ray wasn't satisfied. It was too easy for them to simply agree. He needed to be certain, as much as he could. "Leo, do you agree with this?" Ray asked, meeting his son's gaze. "Yeah, Dad. I mean, if you weren't around," Leo replied. "And it could help Mom." "And you, Eric?" Ray turned to his son-in-law, who typically deferred to his wife, Christine, in most matters. "I don't think it's a big issue, Ray," Eric answered calmly. "Rebecca?" Ray directed his attention to his daughter-in-law, who seemed hesitant, almost avoiding his eyes behind Leo. "Dad, I'm not really," Rebecca began, clearly reluctant to give a direct response. Ray found it intriguing that even after 3 years, Eric still addressed him by his first name, whereas Rebecca had quickly adapted to calling him Dad. "Don't be shy, Rebecca. You've been part of this family for 3 years now. Besides, you're a grown woman and your opinion matters to me." "Well, it seems like it could be okay," Rebecca finally answered, "as long as she's careful and discreet." And ultimately, it came down to his granddaughters. They belonged to a different generation, so he suspected their perspective on the matter would be quite different. Nowadays, infidelity in marriages seemed almost commonplace, even expected, but he couldn't help but wonder if they would side with him. They had shared many memorable moments together. He had attended countless recitals and spoiled them endlessly at the mall. Would they truly be accepting of this? What do you girls think? "Oh, Grandpa, we probably shouldn't get involved," Allison replied. "Come on, you're both adults. Well, almost. And I'm sure you have opinions," he pressed. Julia and Allison exchanged glances, then looked at their parents, who silently encouraged them to speak their minds. At that moment, Ray sensed what their response would be. Whether they believed in it or not, their mother had clearly persuaded them to support their grandmother. "Well, I mean," Julia, the eldest of them, began, "that a lot of our friends don't mind their partners dating other people. It's just intimacy." Ah, the familiar excuse of the infidels. It's just intimacy. Ray expected it to come up sooner or later, and it did, although he was surprised it took so long. His wife was willing to do anything to get her way and meet her beloved boyfriend once a week. Suddenly, Ray realized that it was useless to argue. She would most likely find a way, regardless of his feelings. Everything they once had is gone forever. He glanced at Josie, who was waiting for his answer. "So that settles it, Josephine. Majority rules. I suppose you'll get what you want." His wife's face lit up as if her greatest wish had been granted. Ray simply turned and headed for the front door. He'd barely taken a few steps when he heard her call his name. Perhaps she had reconsidered seeing his reaction, he hoped. He turned back, but it was not to be. "Can I tell Luke you were joking about the body bag thing?" "Sure, whatever. I'm going for a drive." "But Dad," Leo protested, "we're about to leave for the fireworks." "Go on without me," Ray replied. "I'm not in the mood anymore." As he walked out, silence enveloped him until the door closed behind him, replaced instantly by sounds of celebration. Looking back through the window, he saw Josie receiving hugs from her supporters. They were all united in this, against him. After the brief celebration ended, Josie immediately called her lover. She reassured him that she and Ray had discussed everything and he had withdrawn his objections. She wanted to confirm he hadn't moved on to someone else and that he still planned to visit her Saturday morning. He picked up on the third ring and promised he would come, eagerly anticipating their meeting. With that settled, the family loaded into the car and set off to watch the city's impressive fireworks display. They chatted and laughed, relieved to have resolved the unpleasantness and confident that Ray would be okay, and that it wouldn't disrupt anything. Meanwhile, as Eric parked the car, Ray sat alone in his vehicle overlooking the city. He had discovered this spot in the nearby hills years ago, retreating here whenever he needed time to reflect. It was ironic that his absence from the festivities allowed the family to travel in one car instead of two, casting him as the outsider, though no one drew that connection. He felt stung by the overwhelming support Josie received from every family member. He had expected that at least one of them would recognize that his own struggles weren't a justification for his wife's infidelity. Yet they had all sided against him. And that was painful. He felt like an outsider, aged and discarded. It brought to mind tales from his childhood, stories of communities abandoning their elderly when they became too frail or burdensome. He felt he was now just in the way, being pushed aside. All he wanted was to sleep, but his interrupted nap prevented that. It was close to midnight when he finally returned home. He noticed his daughter's and Josie's cars still parked, but the others had gone. The sound of the car horn as it locked must have alerted those inside, because the front door opened just as he approached. It was Josie. "Where have you been?" "I've been worried sick." Ray walked past his wife without saying a word. He noticed his daughter sitting on the couch, watching him intently. "Why are you here?" he asked. "Mom got really worried when you didn't come back after the fireworks. Everyone else has plans tomorrow morning, so I stayed with her. You could have at least answered your phone." Ray glanced at his phone and remembered he had turned it off when he arrived at the mountain. He hadn't wanted to be disturbed. "Well, as you can see, I'm fine now. You can go home." Christine was surprised. Her father was usually the kindest, most polite man she knew, and she had never heard him speak like that, especially not to her, his little girl. She watched him walk into his bedroom until the door closed behind him, then picked up her purse from the table and kissed her mother goodbye. By the time Josie finished tidying up the house and entered the room, Ray was already asleep. The atmosphere at home remained calm over the next week. Josie sensed that despite his agreement, Ray was displeased with her actions involving Luke. However, she believed he would eventually accept it because of his love for her, hoping he would either forget or set it aside. For Ray, it marked the utter ruin of his life. Despite being a devoted family man for 4 decades, his entire family had cast him aside when his presence became inconvenient. The fact that Josie had sought her family's support for her infidelity was, in Ray's view, the end of their marriage. The unanimous rejection by everyone dealt the final blow to his family ties, or at least his place within it. After years of putting others first, Ray was about to make a change. Like every Saturday morning for the past few years, Ray drove to the country club to join his group of 8 older men who booked consecutive tea times and shuffled the foursomes weekly. Despite knowing the situation at home, Ray attempted to concentrate on the game, aware of what was happening. His performance wasn't his poorest, but it was his weakest in a long while. He tried to laugh off the friendly teasing he received, though it wasn't effortless. Meanwhile, at Josie's home, she observed Ray as he departed for his 7 a.m. golf game. Despite her attempt to show affection and give him a goodbye kiss, he remained silent and barely allowed her lips to touch his cheek. She felt guilty knowing her husband was hurt. But she pushed those thoughts aside when Luke approached. She had asked Luke to park discreetly down the street and around the corner, avoiding attention from nosy neighbors. There was no way to avoid him walking up to the door, though. Josie let him knock before opening the door and welcoming him inside. She was dressed only in a robe, which soon found its way to the floor after the door closed. They exchanged a passionate kiss, and Luke effortlessly lifted Josie into his arms, carrying her to the bedroom where he gently laid her on the bed. Luke took a step back and took off his outer clothes. What he said to Josie was true. He really preferred older women. He often thought about the women he had helped and how they had reciprocated him. Although Josie was 59 years old, which is more than his usual partners, she looked to be about 50, and she radiated energy. Josie admired Luke's physique as he took off his clothes. He wasn't overly muscular, but he was strong and fit, unlike Ray, who was inferior to his age. Damn it, Josie thought. Stop comparing him. This is not a competition. Ray had a lot of problems in this regard. Luke, however, had no such problems. She always let Ray boss her around, and she liked being submissive. Lying on her back, Josie signaled to Luke. The first meetings were uncomfortable because of the size of his instrument, but she adapted, and now it was easy for her. When it all started, she realized that she missed it so much when Ray's health deteriorated, and the temptation to experience it again was irresistible. The thought of losing everything once Ray found out was unbearable to her. She regretted involving the family in Ray's persuasion, but it worked, and she was sure Ray would come to terms with it eventually. She loved the feeling of being hugged by this young, sturdy man. Josie hadn't fully realized how much Ray's abilities had changed over the years. Naturally, such changes occur with age, often so gradually that you do not notice them until you have the opportunity to compare them. Although it had been a long time since she and Ray had been close, the memories were fresh enough for her to appreciate the stark contrast between their meetings and what Luke had offered her. No, she didn't want to give up on something so exciting. Their time together lasted approximately 2 hours. Luke showered while Josie changed the bedsheets and started the laundry. He helped her with the bed and then left. Josie then showered herself, ensuring a thorough cleanse inside and out. She understood this was difficult for Ray, so she made sure there were no reminders. She prevented Luke from leaving any marks and diligently cleaned the house. By 12:30, Josie was confident. The house and herself were perfectly prepared for her husband's imminent return. She had satisfied her desires and was ready to focus on Ray for the rest of the week. Ray typically arrived home between 12:30 and 1:00. When he hadn't returned by 2:01, Josie started to worry but remained calm. By 3:00, her concern grew, prompting her to call his cell phone, which went unanswered. By 5:00, despite multiple calls and texts, her worry intensified. Finally, at 7, after hours without contact from Ray, she called their daughter. She explained the situation, and within minutes, Christine and her husband, along with Josie's granddaughters, were gathered in the living room. Eric drove out to the country club on a hunch, hoping to gather any information. Staff there confirmed Ray had been present earlier, but had left hours ago. Christine contacted the police, discovering there were no reported accidents involving Ray, and that they couldn't yet file a missing persons report. They agreed to keep his details on record for any developments. Christine thanked them, though she doubted it would lead to anything. With no other options, Josie didn't know any of Ray's golfing friends or their contacts. All they could do now was wait. It was nearly 11 p.m. when Julia, who had been sitting near the front of the house, announced she had seen headlights pull into the driveway. Sensing potential conflict, she and her sister hurried upstairs to their mom's old bedroom. Eric, an early riser, had already gone to bed in Leo's old room. That left Josie and Christine to confront Ray. Ray entered through the front door, unsurprised to find his wife furious in the entryway, and only mildly taken aback to see his daughter lingering in the living room. He had noticed her car outside, but had hoped she would give him and Josie some space. It seemed she was fully backing her mother's quest for something new. "Where have you been?" Josie snapped. "Golfing," Ray replied calmly. "Not for over 12 hours, you haven't." "True. After golf, I had lunch at the club. Their chicken piccata is really good. Then I caught the new Dwayne Johnson movie. It was a bit predictable, but I liked it. After that, damn it, Raymond, I don't need a rundown of every place you've been." "Well, you did ask where I've been," Ray muttered. "I want to understand why you didn't come home after golf as usual and why you didn't pick up your phone." "I didn't answer because my phone was off," he explained, showing his wife that it was indeed powered down. "And I stayed away because I didn't want to be in the house with your friend." "That's absurd, Raymond. Nothing's changed. I finished cleaning the entire house long before you were done with golf. There was no reason for you to be late or gone all day." "That's your perspective, Josephine. I simply didn't want to risk being around him afterward. I've said it before. I won't stay in the same house. Now it's late. I'm going to bed." Ray walked past his wife, casting a stern glance at their daughter but saying nothing as he headed to the bedroom. He half expected one of them to follow, but neither did. As he prepared for bed, he overheard other voices in the hallway and realized Christine's entire family had been visiting. Just great. By the time Josie had said goodbye to everyone and joined him in the bedroom, Ray appeared to be asleep, or at least pretending. Josie couldn't be certain. She briefly considered waking him for further discussion, but decided instead to prepare for bed herself. The next weekend unfolded similarly, but this time without calls or texts. Josie accepted that Ray would be out all day and used the opportunity to thoroughly tidy up the house. As the day grew later, Josie started feeling a bit uneasy about being home alone. She phoned Christine, who agreed to come over and keep her company until Ray returned. Eric and their daughters stayed home. Ray arrived around 11 Chi, surprised to find Christine's car parked outside. He wondered if another confrontation was brewing. Upon entering, however, Ray was greeted warmly by Josie, who kissed him on the cheek, with their daughter smiling in the background. "Why don't you change, darling, and then you can tell me about your day," Josie said, leaving Ray somewhat perplexed. Josie headed to the kitchen to fetch drinks for both of them, while Ray went into the bedroom to change. As he swapped his clothes for pajamas and returned to the living room, he sensed Christine was ready to leave, but lingering for a reason. "Dad, I know this situation is tough for you, but I just want to say how amazing it is that you're expressing your love for Mom by supporting her in this. It means a lot." "Allowing her?" Ray mused. Is that how they viewed it? "Now I want to make something clear, Christine. This is the final discussion we'll have about this, the last one. Make sure everyone understands that." "Of course, Dad, I get it. It's hard to move on when it keeps coming up. I'll make sure everyone knows." With that, she kissed him on the cheek and departed. Moments later, Josie returned with their drinks. Ray couldn't shake the feeling that it took longer than usual, wondering if it was deliberate to give Christine an opportunity to convey how wonderful he was being. And so it continued this way for several months. Josie maintained her physical relationship with Luke, while Ray found himself exploring and enjoying some new activities. He still golfed every Saturday morning and made sure to catch all the movies that interested him. But he also diversified his pursuits, trying bowling, miniature golf, and even dabbling in arcade games. Despite not excelling at them, he found them enjoyable. Life at home followed a fairly normal routine, though discussions about Luke were conspicuously avoided. They shared dinner together each night with pleasant but somewhat superficial conversation. The intimacy they once had shifted. Josie, convinced that her relationship with Luke didn't affect her marriage, continued to show affection to Ray. She may have noticed his dwindling reciprocation, but chose not to address it. Perhaps Josie had become too complacent with the situation. Maybe Ray's silence on the matter led her to believe he was more accepting than he truly was. In any case, when Thanksgiving arrived, Ray was in for a shock. "Mom, Luke's here," he said. That was Christine calling from the front of the house. Ray, who had been sitting in his recliner reading the newspaper, yes, the printed version, very old-fashioned, was startled by this announcement. If he had been drinking something, he would have surely spat it out on the floor. "Oh, good," remarked his wife. He hadn't confirmed if he was coming. Ray pulled the lever to raise his footrest and awkwardly jumped from his chair, catching Josie's attention. "What the hell is he doing here?" Ray exclaimed, clearly upset. "I invited him for Thanksgiving," Josie replied calmly. "He doesn't have family in town and nowhere else to go. I told you I can't be in the same house as him. That's why I'm out all day on Saturdays. And now, you invite him into my house on a family holiday?" "It's my house too, Raymond, and it's not like he's coming over for anything inappropriate. It's no different from when the kids were growing up and we had their friends over. It's just a meal, and I expect you to behave yourself." Josie turned towards the front door to welcome her guest, leaving her husband behind. She was proud of herself for asserting her independence with Luke. To her, their relationship was more than just lovers. Luke was also a dear friend. She believed it was perfectly natural to greet a friend this way. She greeted Luke at the door, introducing him to her children, their spouses, and her granddaughters. Taking his hand, she guided him into the living room to meet her husband. She began to speak before fully rounding the corner. "Luke, you remember my—" But Ray was nowhere to be seen. The chair he occupied just moments ago was empty. Josie looked around, assuming he might have gone to the restroom. As she started towards the bedroom, the garage door opener hummed to life. Hurrying to the kitchen door leading to the garage, Josie caught a glimpse of the door descending and Ray's car pulling away. Christine asked her mom if that was Dad leaving. Yes, it was. "Where's he going?" "Who knows?" Josie replied, frustrated, heading towards her bedroom to compose herself. Luke approached Christine as Josie shut her bedroom door. "Is there anything I can do?" "Should I leave?" he asked. "No, Luke, it's okay. This is about Dad, not you. You're always welcome here." "I just don't want to cause any trouble, but if you're sure—" "We understand, Luke, and we appreciate it." The family and Luke enjoyed their meal together. Luke, being new, was the center of attention, but he also showed interest in getting to know the family. After dinner, he joined Leo and Eric to watch football while the ladies went shopping. No one noticed when Ray's car drove by. The holiday had long ended. It was approaching 10 p.m., the house was tidy, and the dishes were washed. The women had returned from their shopping trip with a few items, though nothing significant. Leo and Eric had fallen asleep on the couch, while Ray was still absent. Christine woke her husband and children, instructing them to head home, as she planned to stay with her mother overnight. She always kept essentials like nightgowns and extra clothes there for such occasions. Leo and Rebecca also departed, leaving Christine to wait with her mother. Ray finally arrived close to midnight. He had hoped Josie would be asleep, but she was waiting for him. Instead of engaging in their usual argument, he walked straight past her to his chair, where he resumed reading the paper as if nothing had happened. If he expected Josie to give up, he was mistaken. "Where have you been all day?" she exclaimed. "I went to Denny's for Thanksgiving dinner, then spent the rest of the day at the movies." "We had a perfectly good meal right here, Raymond." "Why did you go to Denny's?" "It wasn't about the food, Josephine. It was about the company." "I can't believe that a 64-year-old man can't be civil to a guest I invited into our home. I would never treat anyone you invited that way." I told you I wouldn't be in this house at the same time he was. Ever. I didn't mean only when he's here to take care of your so-called needs. I meant ever. And you knew that, and you did it anyway. It was just dinner, Ray. Maybe to you, Ray replied, then raised his newspaper between them, signaling the end of their conversation. After about 5 minutes of silence, Christine, his own daughter and seemingly a betrayer to their cause, knelt beside him on the floor. Dad, please try to understand that he means a lot to her. She doesn't love him or anything, but she cares about him and didn't want him to be alone on the holiday. And you don't have an issue with your mom's friend becoming involved with the family. He's not part of the family, Dad, but he's someone important to her, a friend like any other. Ray knew arguing was futile. Sure, Christine, I understand. I hope so, Dad. I'll see you later. With a kiss on his cheek, Christine departed. Josie didn't reappear that night, and when Ray eventually dragged himself out of his recliner and into the bedroom, she was asleep in bed. Thanksgiving appeared to mark a significant shift, at least in certain aspects. Demonstrations of affection became rare as Ray and Josie increasingly resembled roommates more than anything else. Josie believed she had reason to seek a lover, given Ray's inability to fulfill his role, viewing Ray's response as selfish and driven by ego. In contrast, Ray perceived Josie's decision as a betrayal of their marriage and shared life. Despite his efforts to treat her with kindness and maintain necessary communication, the love that had grown over their 40-plus-year relationship was steadily fading. When Josie mentioned she had some last-minute shopping to do on Christmas Eve, Ray remained silent, even though she hadn't needed to scramble for gifts in years. He knew exactly where she was headed, and he didn't need to follow her or track her phone. The look in her eyes conveyed everything he needed to understand. Whether she merely wanted to exchange gifts or desired more, he couldn't say for sure, but he knew she was having a private celebration with him. On New Year's Eve, Ray did kiss his wife at midnight, though it lacked the fervor of previous years. Josie felt disappointed that she couldn't convey anything to Luke, but she did call him the next day to wish him a happy new year. As Valentine's Day approached, Ray arranged a special dinner at an upscale seafood restaurant, which delighted Josie. It sparked a hope in her that perhaps her husband was reconnecting with her. However, Ray harbored suspicions. Josie's inclination to spend holidays with her lover made him question Valentine's Day. After all, it was a day for lovers, and Ray doubted Josie would let it slip by without seeing Luke. So, he decided to leave his office for a while and keep watch over his house. He parked a bit down the street, positioning himself to have a clear view of the front door and the surrounding streets. As expected, he spotted Luke parking around the corner and walking up the sidewalk. Ray half anticipated Luke might just walk in, but instead he knocked and waited for Josie to let him in. Ray doubted they were just meeting to talk. Clearly, this was their own private Valentine's Day celebration. It was evident they were more than just casual acquaintances now. That evening's dinner was subdued. Josie had entered it optimistically, hoping to reignite her relationship with her husband, but the cheerful demeanor he had shown over the past few days had vanished. She felt disappointed but tried to make the best of it, wondering what had caused this sudden change. With no young children, Easter was primarily an excuse for a large family meal. They did hide a few eggs around the yard, but they were the large plastic kind, often containing gift cards or other small prizes. It was a small way to embrace the holiday spirit. To Ray's relief, Luke hadn't been invited, or at least hadn't shown up. Josie had respected that request since the Thanksgiving incident, though Ray suspected she had visited him on days other than Saturday mornings, possibly more frequently than he knew. She had arranged to meet him on Valentine's Day, and could easily have done so on other occasions as well. After the morning festivities ended, Ray announced that he was going to lie down. Yes, he was a little tired, but there was nothing he couldn't handle. He just wanted to avoid having to sit and chat with the family that betrayed him. He couldn't avoid them at all, but he could limit the amount of time he spent with them. It was a beautiful day, and he opened one of the windows that overlooked the backyard. A cool breeze blew through the room. Unfortunately, Josie and Kristen's conversation was also interrupted. "Well, how is Luke?" he heard his daughter ask. "Shh, not too loud. I don't want your father to hear." Okay, Kristen replied, lowering her voice but still speaking loudly enough for Ray to hear her clearly. "I just can't believe my mom has a boyfriend who is 10 years younger than me." "He's not my boyfriend, Kristen. He's just—" "Come on, Mom. You meet with him 2 to 3 times a week, and you also go out for lunch together. You may not want to use the word guy, but he's like that anyway." Okay, he's my boyfriend. I just want to be attentive to your father's feelings." "I understand, Mom, and I love Dad too, you know I do, and I don't want to see him hurt. But let's face it, he's elderly and you're still young. He's only 5 years older than me, Christine. In chronological age, yes, but you're active and he struggles to get through the day without a nap. You deserve this. Honestly, I'm a bit jealous that you're experiencing the whole getting to know someone process again. Does anyone else know? I mean that it's more than just Saturday mornings? Leo, Eric, and Rebecca do. I haven't involved the girls. Are they all okay with it?" Leo and Eric see no issue. They agree with me that you should tend to your needs since Dad can't fulfill them. Rebecca thinks it's wrong, but she doesn't want to upset Dad, so she's keeping quiet. What Dad doesn't know won't hurt him. As Ray listened to the depths of his wife's betrayal and his daughter's enthusiastic support for her having a boyfriend, never mind what she said about him, he felt the last remnants of love and affection for them leave his heart. Though he had made preparations before, he had hesitated to act due to his love for his family and his long marriage to Josie. Now it was time to initiate the final steps in earnest. Ray closed the window slowly, then climbed into bed. Over the next couple of months, Ray's relationships with his wife and daughter worsened. His connections with his son and son-in-law weren't much better. However, he made efforts to improve his bond with Rebecca and his granddaughters. This was partly based on what Christine had mentioned about Rebecca, and his belief that his granddaughters were too young to fully understand the situation. Mother's Day. Every family has its own customs. For this family, Mother's Day meant a fancy brunch at a local restaurant with French influences. The food and service were outstanding, reflecting the upscale prices. When the children were little, Ray would take them out to honor their mother and his wife. As the children grew up and started working, they took charge of these celebrations. The same tradition applied to Father's Day. The family had a unique tradition. One parent refrained from participating in certain celebrations. Years ago, Ray stopped attending Mother's Day, and Josie skipped Father's Day. They allowed their children to enjoy these occasions with the appropriate parent and would share their own sentiments later. However, recent events had stirred something in Ray. Typically, he used his free time for personal activities like reading, but this morning was different. He dressed himself and drove to the restaurant where Josie had left just half an hour earlier, confident she would be there. Ray didn't plan to join the brunch or even make his presence known. In fact, he didn't expect to leave his car at all. As he scanned the parking lot, he easily spotted Christine and Eric's car, then Josie's, and then Leo and Rebecca's. Just when he was beginning to hope he was mistaken, he saw it. The one thing he had been dreading to find, parked discreetly in a corner space. Luke's car. Ray had witnessed this scenario too many times and had committed the license plate number to memory. Either his wife or possibly his daughter had invited her lover, boyfriend, whatever, to join a family gathering. Fully aware Ray wouldn't be there. Despite everything that had transpired thus far and the fact that Ray's love for his wife had all but vanished, this latest betrayal stoked his anger, erasing any intention he had of restraining himself. Ray drove home, fetched his golf clubs, and headed to the nearby driving range. He went through multiple buckets of balls, losing count along the way. By the end, he was worn out. His shots lacked distance and accuracy, but the physical exertion provided a cathartic release. Returning home, Ray was ready for a nap. They thought he was useless, incapable of making it through the day without a nap. He was content to let them maintain that belief. Josie greeted him upon his arrival. He speculated whether she had spent some private time with her boy toy, though he no longer felt invested enough to care. The pain lingered, but it was different from genuine concern. Stepping into the house, he wondered if she would admit to inviting Luke, given the chance. "How was your Mother's Day with your family?" Ray asked, emphasizing the word family. "It was lovely, Ray. Thank you for asking." "I had a wonderful time with the children," Josie replied. She hadn't mentioned Luke. Did this mean she, and perhaps the rest of the family, now considered him part of their family, or had she simply chosen not to bring him up? Ray realized he might never find out. He proceeded to his bedroom and settled down for a nap. Soon the 4th of July was approaching again. Josie was always cheerful, and Ray, of course, understood perfectly well why. After working at the company for almost a year, he was well aware that Josie believed she had successfully handled her situation. Thanks to the support of her husband and the young guy she met several times a week, Josie considered her life almost perfect. Luke turned out to be a great guy. Since Ray was no longer interested in physical intimacy, it was the only aspect of her life that seemed unfinished, but she was willing to put up with it. Luke had recently moved to a new job where he had to work in the evenings, which allowed him to spend several days a week with Josie. They didn't pay more, but she wasn't with him for the money. To avoid awkwardness with Ray, or, to be completely honest, to avoid being caught, they avoided Josie's bedroom except on Saturday mornings. This meant that they could live in Luke's apartment or at a friend's, given that Luke had roommates. The most challenging aspect for her had been excluding Luke from events. She hadn't broached the topic with Ray again, and didn't anticipate a change in his stance. It was the sole source of her dissatisfaction. Initially hopeful, and still desiring now, she wished that Ray and Luke could at least be cordial, if not friends. To her, they fulfilled different roles and were not in competition. She spent her days with Luke and most evenings and weekends with Ray. She saw no reason why this arrangement couldn't work out. Therefore, albeit reluctantly, she didn't invite Luke to join them for the family barbecue and the fireworks outing. The family arrived early to assist with food preparation. Ray made sure to be visible and active to dispel any notions of fatigue later on. He kept a vigilant watch on the gathering, half expecting Josie to sneak Luke in, but Luke never made an appearance. Throughout the day, Ray increasingly feigned exhaustion. Granted, some of it wasn't entirely an act, but a good portion was. Perhaps he overdid it because Josie seemed to pick up on it and approached him. "Sweetheart, why don't you lie down so you'll be refreshed for the fireworks?" she softly suggested. The difficult part about all of this was knowing Josie loved him deeply and genuinely cared, which only made his upcoming decision harder. "I won't be joining the fireworks this year. I thought I'd just enjoy the day with family and turn in early," Ray replied. "Are you sure? You missed them last year, but you've always looked forward to them before," Josie remarked, clearly concerned about his absence again. "I'm sure. I guess I'm just getting old. But I'm sure everyone will have a great time without me." "Okay, if you're sure." After she left him, Josie immediately set out to find Christine. Ray observed as she navigated through the crowd, determined to locate their daughter. It dawned on him suddenly that Josie had been trying to ascertain his plans for attending the fireworks display, and there was only one reason that would be so important to her. She intended to invite Luke to join them. It was another painful betrayal, though it hardly mattered now. As the evening progressed, guests began to depart until only the family remained. At different times, Josie, Christine, Leo, and Eric all approached him, urging him to reconsider joining them for fireworks, and expressing how much they would miss him if he stayed home. Ray understood the truth of the situation. His family was slipping away from him. As the family prepared to leave for the fireworks, Ray suppressed his anger and made a point to interact with each member. Despite whatever had transpired over the past year, He cherished the memories of their time together and would miss those moments. He held his granddaughters close, feeling the weight of their absence already. Ray watched with a sense of melancholy as the family happily piled into Christine's minivan. It was clear they didn't really miss him at all. He pushed those thoughts aside and turned his attention back to his own affairs. The family arrived home later than usual to give Josie a chance to spend some private time with Luke. Luke expressed gratitude for the invitation, especially since he had no nearby family or close relatives. Although only Josie had spent significant time with him, the family had come to regard him as part of their extended family, and were delighted to see how happy he had made Josie. They said their goodbyes at the park as it was clear he couldn't accompany them home. Upon returning home, they tried to enter quietly so as not to disturb Ray. They fixed some drinks and gathered around the dining room table to chat. About 45 minutes later, Josie thought of Ray and asked her son to go check on him. Leo obediently left the table and walked slowly into the master bedroom. To his surprise, Ray was not asleep in bed. Leo found the bed neatly made with white sheets as Josie always preferred. There he discovered Ray's wedding ring and a flash drive placed on the sheets near Ray's pillow. Leo's unease grew. "He's not here," Leo announced upon leaving the bedroom. "What do you mean he's not here?" his mother asked urgently. "Just that, Mom. The bed's untouched, and I found these right where he would have slept." Not entirely convinced, Josie entered the bedroom to see for herself. Indeed, the bed was undisturbed, and there was no sign of her husband. Returning to the living room, Eric had already plugged the flash drive into a laptop to investigate its contents. After the files appeared, there was only one, though quite large. Eric looked at his mom, who nodded solemnly. He clicked on the file. The computer video player came to life, and Eric zoomed in, filling the entire screen. At first, only a blank wall was visible on the screen, but voices could be heard in the background. A moment later, Ray appeared in the camera's field of view. "Is this a recording?" "What is it?" he asked, addressing the invisible operator. "Yes," a female voice replied. Ray looked directly at the camera. "Good evening, everyone. If I timed it right, you're watching this a little after 10 p.m., right after returning from the fireworks." Everyone instinctively glanced at the clock next to them and noticed that it was almost 11 p.m., since they had forgotten to check on Ray upon arriving home. "While you are watching this video, I am on board a plane departing from the United States, and for those who are interested, I'm not coming back." Josie screamed, tears streaming down her face. "You betrayed me," the video said. "Each of you. My wife, who has enjoyed my love and support for over 40 years, who has never had to work in her life except to raise our children, threw me away like garbage for a guy half my age, just because he had no health problems. And when I dared to object, she turned the whole family against me. After 40 years of loyalty, dedication and support, Josephine, I expected more from you. I think I deserve it. Your desires, let's be honest, they were desires, not needs, should have taken a back seat to my feelings. It was bad enough that you were doing this behind my back, but it was even worse to turn the family against me. That day it was like I had 7 knives stuck in my heart." Eric paused the video and turned to his wife, Christine. "Christine, your betrayal was just as devastating as your mother's. You used to be Daddy's little girl growing up, always by my side. We did everything together. To see you support your mother in cheating on me, betraying your own father, it hurt me deeply. Even without hearing you say I didn't deserve a faithful wife, the pain would still be unbearable." "I never said any of that," Christine exclaimed. "Never. Leo, Eric, you guys must be the biggest fools alive. Do you even realize you've given your wives permission to cheat?" Ray's voice continued from the speaker. "Leo, I trust Rebecca, but Eric, Christine's words should worry you. She's told her mother how jealous she is." Eric glared at Christine, who shook her head in denial, as Ray's accusations poured from the speaker. "No, I never said that, and I would never do that." "You can't object now," Ray went on. "You already said it's fine for Josie. Did you only mean that because it wasn't happening to you, Eric? Will you feel the same when it's your turn?" And Christine can deny it all she wants, but ask her why it's okay for her when she thinks it's wrong for her mother. Her answer will say it all. Eric paused the video and looked at his wife, his expression troubled. "Did you mention that you admired your mom?" he eventually inquired. "I can't recall exactly what I said. I remember feeling happy for Mom as she gets to experience that early stage of a new relationship, getting to know you again." "So you're interested in getting to know someone again?" Eric persisted. "No, darling, please don't read too much into it, okay? I love you and I have no desire to be with anyone else. Unless I fail to perform, right? Sweetheart, can we discuss this later? Right now, we need to focus on Mom." "Okay, but we're not done with this." Eric pressed play again and Ray continued. "I was not willing to remain in a marriage where my wife was cheating on me every week, and certainly not once it escalated to several times each week. Sorry, Josephine, but you were far from discreet and subtle as you thought. And inviting him to your Mother's Day celebration? That was just tasteless. As you might expect, I have no plans to reveal my whereabouts, but rest assured, even if you find me, there's nothing you can do. Regarding our finances, I've taken the majority for my retirement after dedicating most of my adult life to everyone else. Josephine, I've left you the house, fully paid for and worth a few $100,000. My lawyer will contact you to arrange the sale if you choose. Additionally, I've left around $400,000 in the bank, a token of $10,000 for each good year you gave me. Unfortunately, no credit for the last 12 months. Don't worry about me, any of you. Taking the remainder of our assets, including our investments, has left me with nearly an 8-figure bank balance. So, I'll be perfectly fine. Not that I expected any of you to be concerned. The way I've been treated over the past year shows clearly how you all feel about me now. And if you're concerned about me spending my retirement years alone, don't be. I already have a companion sitting next to me on the airplane right now. Let me introduce you to Deborah. The woman whose voice we heard earlier stepped into view from behind the camera. Everyone, meet Deborah. She'll be helping me enjoy your inheritance. Hi, everyone, said an attractive brunette in her 50s, waving to the camera. Deborah and I have been spending a lot of time together for the past 4 or 5 months, especially after I told her about my wife's actions. We've been confirming how well we get along. Josephine, you might remember Deborah. You've met her several times. She worked with me for over 30 years in marketing before taking early retirement to join me in my new home. We've been close friends all this time, and the best part is that her needs are simple. Just a desire for intimacy, cuddling, kissing, and maybe a bit more. I'm looking forward to it. Everyone turned to Josie, gauging her reaction to the revelation. Her expression clearly indicated she was deeply upset by it. Eric stopped the video. Mom, are you all right? Leo asked. No, Leo, I'm really not okay, but let's just get through this, Josie replied. Eric resumed playing the video. Josephine, Ray began, his voice taking on a more solemn tone. I've loved you since the day we met. If anyone had told me you were capable of treating me like this, I would have shut them down before they finished speaking. I had envisioned spending our later years together, welcoming visits from our children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. I'm profoundly disappointed that your desires led to the end of that dream for both of us. I hope it was worth it for you. You should have enough money to sustain yourself for a long time, especially if you sell the house. If you need more, I'm sure the children who supported your affair will be willing to financially support you as well. Come to think of it, it was my money that put them through college and helped them secure good jobs, so I suppose I deserve some recognition for that too. I wish I understood what made a few moments of pleasure so compelling that it led you to this. This year has been terrible, and things were only getting worse. I was aware of the extra time you were spending with him each week. I could have confronted this months ago, but I chose to wait, perhaps because I wanted to declare my independence on Independence Day. Part of me will always love you, or at least the life we once shared. I wish things had turned out differently, but somewhere along the way, you forgot that our marriage was about us, not just you and I. I always avoided making choices solely for my benefit. Choices that would hurt you, unlike what you did with Luke. Maybe you thought I would accept it because I've always sacrificed for you in the past. I don't know. Regardless of the reasons, it's over now and cannot be undone. I hope for your sake it was worth it. Farewell, Josephine. I will miss you and what we could have had. Ray stared into the camera as the screen faded to black. Tears streamed down the faces of everyone in the room, though some were more emotional than others. None of them had expected Josie's affair with Luke to drive Ray away. They had always assumed he would acquiesce, as he had done in the past. Deep down, they never thought he had the strength to take such a decisive action. Wearily, they all spent that night at Josie's house. She would need their support in the days ahead. Rebecca was tidying up her kitchen when her phone rang. Typically, calls were either from her husband, Leo, or unwanted spam. Glancing at the screen, she saw the number was blocked. That piqued her curiosity enough to answer. Hello? Rebecca, it's Ray. Oh my God, Ray, how are you? Where are you? I'm fine, Rebecca, just fine. Where I am right now, I'll keep to myself for now. More importantly, how are you? I'm good, Dad. I have some news, though. I'm pregnant. Congratulations. How far along? Just a couple of months. We found out right after you left. It's hard to believe it's been almost 3 weeks. Time flies. Thanks for calling me Dad, by the way. I wasn't sure if I still had that title. Not with me. You know, Dad, I owe you an apology. I should have spoken up. When everyone confronted you that day and asked for our opinions, I should have said I thought it was wrong. But I was the newest addition to the family, and I was scared. I had a feeling, but I don't think it would have changed anything. Josie and Christine were pretty set on making it happen. Consider yourself forgiven. Thanks, Dad. That meant a lot to me, especially since I want both of my baby's grandfathers to be involved in its life. So, are you planning to be a part of its life? We'll have to see, honey. I don't have any plans to return to the States, but maybe we can figure something out. I'd love to see you and the baby. So how are things over there? In a word, tense. Josie is struggling a lot, though she's still seeing Luke several times a week. Christine and Eric are having issues. They're keeping it quiet. But I think your comment about her having a reason to cheat on him hit a nerve. How are you and Leo doing? We're hanging in there. We're still early in our marriage, so everything feels new. I think with Christine and Eric being married so long, I don't know, it makes them both more cautious. But the girls are really upset. Really? That surprises me. You were always close with them. They miss spending time with you. They still don't see anything special in casual intimacy, but they understand that everything is different in marriage. I get it. I noticed Christine's influence in their responses. Look, can you gather everyone at your place tonight? I think I'm ready to talk to them. I don't think that'll be a problem, Dad. We'll talk then. That evening, the entire family gathered in Leo and Rebecca's living room. Rebecca had explicitly excluded Luke from the gathering. She laid out ingredients for sandwiches, but everyone's nerves kept them from eating much. At exactly 8 the phone rang, and Rebecca put it on speaker. Hi, Dad. Everyone's here. Thanks, sweetheart. Just so everyone knows, Deborah is with me. Let's aim for a civil conversation rather than a shouting match. Agreed? The family murmured their agreement. Good. I felt it was time we talked, though I wanted to wait a bit. I spoke to Rebecca first because I sensed she might not be as supportive as the rest of you. Leo, congratulations on the baby. Thanks, Dad. I'll do my best to live up to your fatherhood standards. You know the saying, the best thing you can do for your kids is love their mother. Keep that in mind and you'll be fine. Alice and Julia? Yes, Grandpa, the granddaughters replied almost in unison. Girls, I was disappointed you sided with your grandmother initially, but Rebecca and Deborah convinced me you may have been pressured and lacked the experience to grasp the complexities of a 40-year marriage. I still have your emails and numbers, so we'll talk more later, all right? Of course, Grandpa, Allison answered. We just miss you. I miss you too. Why don't you find something to do while the rest of us chat? The girls said their farewells and then busied themselves. Before leaving, they paused to give their grandmother a brief hug. So, Ray continued, does anyone have something they're just dying to say? Ray, honey, please, Josie began unsurprisingly. Please come back. We can work through this. If you had told me you were thinking of leaving, we could have figured it out. Why did it have to come to that, Josephine? I told you I couldn't accept it, and you sought support from the family. You started inviting him to family gatherings, seeing him multiple times a week. You replaced me with him while we were barely even roommates. You allowed it to happen, and I reached my breaking point. But you never said anything more. I thought you had accepted it, understood it was just something I did. It drove a wedge between us, and there was no way it wouldn't. From the moment I realized what was happening and you chose him over me, our marriage was doomed. I'm sorry, Ray, can't we? No, Josephine, we can't. Even if I wanted to, which I don't. I've made a commitment to Deborah, and I intend to honor it. What about your commitment to me? You made that one first. Yes, I did. And I would still be honoring it, but as far as I'm concerned, when you broke yours, you released me from mine and allowed me to make a new commitment, which I have. Silence fell, broken only by Josie's sobs. Josie, Ray spoke gently. I regret to say that continuing this conversation is pointless. Whether intentional or not, you've pushed me aside. There's no way to undo that. Josie rose without a word and sought solace in Christine and Eric's room. Christine pounced. Nice move, Dad. Did you call just to hurt Mom and make her cry? Because your ego couldn't handle another man making her happier than you? I suppose that's your perspective, Christine. Eric, how does it feel? Can you accept another man making your wife happier than you? Christine abruptly halted her attack under her husband's stern gaze. Throughout their marriage, Christine had been dominant, while Eric, like many husbands, went along to avoid conflict. But recent weeks had brought a significant shift, and Christine knew their marriage was in real trouble. You can't support another woman's infidelity without feeling some guilt yourself. No, Ray, I can't. And you're right. I hadn't thought about it like that. My wife and I are facing serious issues after all of this. I understand. And let me offer this for what it's worth. Fight for your marriage before it's too late. You love each other, but you've started taking one another for granted. I could see that even before this mess. Don't let this destroy you, but let it be a turning point. You're a team. Remember that. Josie didn't. After a prolonged silence, largely due to others having nothing to contribute at that moment, Christine spoke in a voice that resembled that of a young girl. Daddy, Christine said, could I speak with you privately? As long as everyone else is okay with it, I don't mind, he replied. Seeing no objections from the others, Christine picked up the phone and retreated to a spare room, closing the door behind her. Daddy, I'm scared. Eric has been mentioning divorce, or at least counseling. What should I do? You need to work on it, Christine. That's what you do. Your daughters are grown, more or less. Now invest the time you used to raise them back into your marriage. It's not downtime, like your mother might have thought. Remember, you're not his boss. You're his partner. He's really angry. He started seeing it as me giving myself permission to cheat on him, and now he snaps at me all the time. I can tell he's wondering if I've already done something. Have you? No, Daddy, no. But I don't know how to make him believe that. All you can do is ensure there's no reason for suspicion in the future. If you do that, doubts about the past should fade. Dad, I'm sorry. Can this be fixed somehow? Like you and Mom? It's too late for us, honey, but not for you. Okay, Daddy. I love you. I love you too.